Hello, it's Writing Wednesday, and I thought I would talk today about traveling and the traveler's mind. This is, um, it's getting to be, it's been Mother's Day, it's getting into graduation season, and I know that some of you will be dusting off your suitcases and finding your passports and wondering if they're still good and starting to think about getting out of town. Um, and traveling, if you're a writer, traveling is um, it's a way of kind of cleaning the windshield, getting a new, fresh perspective on life, seeing how others live, and then often you bring that freshness back with you to encounter your own world in a fresh way. I'm going to be teaching this summer with the travel writer Pico Iyer, who wrote the book on Graham Greene, and he wrote a great book on the Dalai Lama. Video Night in Kathmandu, he's very much kind of the spokesman for a certain kind of international living. And we have wanted to teach a class on the travel journal for a long time. And we're in the new Esalen catalog. So, and this is brand new. And we'll be in Esalen teaching a 5-day workshop on the Traveler's Journal. It's the Traveler's Practice, Journey and Journal, with me and Pico Iyer. Uh, this is going to be incredible, and it just opened. So if you are interested in taking it, I'd jump on it. Because the travel journal for writers is because you're seeing freshly, which is why we travel, to get out of our heads, out of our routines, out of the kind of bleariness with which we encounter familiar objects, and into fresh impressions, strong impressions. As writers, it takes us one more step, because in getting rid of habitual reactions, habitual sights, it also challenges us to see if we can meet an encounter directly, see if we can capture something new. And so I remember my daughter going backpacking in Utah, and the kids got to the top of Green Mesa in Utah, and they're looking out at this incredible broken mesa land, and it was sunset, and it's red, and it was quite an overwhelming sight. And somebody said, there are no words to describe this. And my daughter, of course, being a writer's daughter, said, oh yeah, there are words to describe this. But how do you describe that majestic landscape, something so incredible, if you haven't been able to describe your street, your backyard, sitting at a cafe in your own hometown? You have to get in practice. You have to start describing things so that when you get into a new environment, that you have the language and you're ready to really look at it and see, how do I describe it? Now, I used to keep travel journals when I was in my 20s and doing a lot of traveling. But to read them now is absolutely excruciating, because all I did was talk about my traveling companions and complain about where I was and interpersonal crapola. Just, they're utterly worthless. I mean, I'm sorry to say, young Janet, that your travel journals have proved absolutely worthless. But, you learn. When you travel and you have those rinse senses, what I did for a while was, in much more recent years, is I stopped carrying camera. I stopped taking pictures of what I was seeing. And instead, I tried to describe what I was seeing as if it were a photograph. I learned to sketch. So if I couldn't actually take it in, I mean, sketching is wonderful because it takes a long time. You sit there with your, maybe in a cafe, with your coffee, and by trying to sketch the scene or paint it, you're looking at something for a long time, 45 minutes, an hour, seeing the relationships between walls, when you start noticing more, the more you sit, the more you notice, and how those paving stones are not quite rectangular, or how the cornices are decorated, what the windows look like half open, and try to describe it. Not so much one of my favorite exercises, which we'll probably discuss in much more length at Esalen, is to write and take the I out, take yourself out of it. Not like I feel, I see, blah, 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 blah. You know, see if you can describe the thing, not you. We all describe ourselves in our journals at home, but in a travel journal, see if you can directly describe your sense impressions. So it's always a good thing to start with the light. Where is the light coming from? What color is the light? How hot is it? Is it humid? Is it making you sweat? What sounds are you hearing? What smells are you smelling? What are they cooking? What's going on around you? The light is different in different places. Can you see a different color? I was with my daughter yesterday, and we came out of a store, and she looked at the light. It was, 5 or 6 in the afternoon in LA. She says, I would know I was in LA. If there were no palm trees, if there were no street signs, I would know that I was in LA, because the certain cast of the light, certain color of the light. I mean, you can say that, but if you sit there longer, you can say, well, what is the cast of the light? What are the words? What is the fragrance? What is the color of that light? Which direction is it coming from? Is it coming through buildings? Is it coming through vegetation? When you travel, you see things, you go in search of the miraculous. You have more time to wander, and just see the things that are unique to that place, that forever after. Literature creates place. I mean, places exist, but until people describe them, there is always sort of a nebulous, undescribed quality. So I find things that I do. Here are some examples of my travel journals, and I tend to like to do decoupage. So I will decoupage them. I always use this particular type of travel journal. I like pencil drawing, so I, just put some Van Gogh in there, and this is another artist that I really like, just more Van Gogh. What I do is, when I travel to a city, I'm quite a pilgrim. So what I often do is take lists of places to go visit, where the writers have lived, where the artists have lived. I mean, to walk where the artists and writers have walked, to me, that's half the trip. I mean, so this is a trip I took to Paris, where I just wrote down where the writers had lived, important places that, you know, just lists of where the writers live, where the artists live. Here's a map that I found in a book. I cut that out and put it in. And then every afternoon I would go visit the writers. I would go visit the artists. So here's 42 Rue Monsieur le Prince. Faulkner lived there. Number 30, it looks like this is also Rue Monsieur le Prince. Faulkner, 26, Nadia Boulanger, the famous piano teacher. 30, number 30, Ford Madox Ford, number 32, Fitzgerald, number 38, Rue Farou, number 2, Man Ray, number 6, Hemingway when he left Hadley for Pauline. And just noticed, Rue Notre Dame des Champs, number 70 was Pound, number 73 was John Singer Sargent, and I would just stand outside these places and have feelings about these writers and where I was, and write those down. I mean, that's the opposite of taking the eye out, but it's a connection that is really stunning. I figured out which cafe, this is a Paris trip, which cafes writers went to. And I would go to those cafes and think about those writers, what they wrote and what they wrote there and what was happening when they lived there. Were they there in the 20s, in the height of the American immigration when it was cheap in France and expensive in the States? And then the writers in the 30s, like Miller. It was cheaper. It was during the Depression. They couldn't work. All kinds of crazy things were going on in Europe. So they were there during that time. The Beat Hotel, 1950s, why the Beats were there and what they were doing there. And the various, there's a glamour about the places that the writers walked. And I would just every day, I would hit like 3 or 4 of these, when Joyce was on 5 Boulevard Raspail, this was an incredible trip. And I just visited the writers, and I like to commune with the writers wherever I am, with the artists, and just kind of feel deeply into the place. I like cities. I tend to gravitate towards cities, but I certainly have spent time in the countryside, where especially painters, artists who have described that scenery, and just sitting there looking at where they painted that. I spent a lot of time at, not a lot, but precious time at Ghost Ranch in New Mexico, and gazing out at Pedernal, which George O'Keeffe painted over and over. And I have strong feelings about George O'Keeffe and about that landscape and what it looks like, what it symbolizes to me, and can you describe the way the sun coming from behind the little flat top, the little pedestal of Pedernal, the sun glazing the little lake that's at the base of that mountain, the size of the sky, the brilliance of the red dirt and the blue sky and the kind of turquoise water. It's a gold turquoise. It coruscates. I have a strong feeling for that landscape, and also the artists and writers who live there. So that's a way I enjoy traveling. But always challenging myself, can I describe that? And then I do draw, I'll do some paintings like that. That's an apartment I was staying at in the Saint-Germain-des-Prés. But I do it for a lot of different, sometimes I have my journals in the travel section of my library, because I have so many maps and stuff. But just sometimes just taking your time to describe a place physically. I'm showing pictures because I like to draw as well. But, can you describe a building like that in words? It takes powering up on your vocabulary on a daily basis because it's hard to describe architectural details when you're on the road. The Fitch scale, OG windows, bay windows, have a complete vocabulary of roofs and doors and windows and how things are constructed. You'll never go wrong having that. But it's, when you are traveling, keep an eye on details, large and small. What does the Tuscan sky look like? Why is that different than a Roman sky? Well, because the metaphors are going to be different because you're in a different place. The more you know about the place, I find knowing the history is really important to me. I'm a history person. I feel the history radiating from the stones. I'm sort of more of a pilgrim. But there are artists who would travel and just, their ability to see the light, their ability, God, read Durrell, read Justine, the first book of the Alexandria Quartet. He writes like a painter. And he literally, squirt this color, squirt that color, but he'll do the scents as well. And then that becomes a journal worth keeping. That's a journal that you come home and not only have you built vocabulary, have you built your eye to see more clearly, but you have then captured something better than a billion pictures on your cell phone. You will have captured a deeper essence of the place that you connected with, that you created. And then the place changes you as well as you changing the place. Try to figure out, what do you do differently here? What do they do differently than you do at home? And then that's why it's easier to notice things when you're traveling. It's like, in Spain we don't eat until 10. We get up from our siesta and we have ice cream at the whatever ice cream parlor on whatever street, and really give a full flavor. What kind of ice cream did you eat, and who's around, and how do they walk, and how do they sit? In Spain you get these, I remember in, where were we? I think this was Madrid, where there's the 4 old ladies together, and they'll sit at a bench and they'll watch everybody go by with you can tell they're commenting on the crowd, but they're like the rulers, it's like they're watching the procession of the hoi polloi, and then they're the queens, and then they have their commentary going. They're fabulous. But in Spain, you don't, in Madrid, you don't eat until 10. So you have your ice cream at 6, a little stroll, then you have dinner at 10. You notice older people wear short sleeves. You don't see all this long sleeve thing. They don't think of that. I remember seeing these women in Spain who, they were so remarkable. They were women who in America would probably not be considered attractive women, because we are very saturated with advertising. Really, the culture is incredibly saturated with advertising, so we're always comparing people to images we're presented with to sell things. Whereas in Spain, you see these women who, conventionally would not be considered very attractive in America, but there, the elegance, the self-confidence, the way they're put together, and it just, they're not just attractive, they are stunning. You can't take your eyes off them. And seeing somebody's baby, I was sketching, and the people, and when I sketch, I like to put in the funny details of travel. So you see the grandeur of some arena, ancient arena, and then you see the people are selling T-shirts on the fence, and I always put the T-shirts in too because they're colorful and lively, and so it's fun to put the T-shirts in, and then people come and see what you're painting. And I'm no good painter. It's pretty goofy stuff, but the people who had the T-shirt place came over, or they're selling T-shirts on the fence, came over. The guy saw what I was doing, and he saw his T-shirts are in there in the arena in Seville. And he had his wife come over, wanted to see it. And they had this baby with them. And the baby was not particularly attractive baby from an American point of view. But she was dressed to the nines. I mean, this baby in this little sailor outfit, the start, I mean, just, incredibly beautiful cotton, crisp cotton sailor suit with the navy blue collar, jewelry on it. I mean, she was going to grow up to be one of those women. This is how it's done. Spain, something I learned in Spain. I noticed, you notice little things, big things, in Seville. They don't rewire anything, it looks like. They add another wire. So there is like jungle tangles of wires in the street. It's fabulous. But if you don't take the time to notice it and take the time to write it down, you come home and the experience doesn't impress upon you when you take a billion pictures the same way it does when you take the time to describe it. Cousin just got back from China, and she had written that she noticed how physical people were with each other. They took each other's arm in the street, they pushed you, they move you around, they touch you when they're talking to you. It's crazy for an American a little, but you notice it. And if you write it down, if you can talk about encounters, if you can talk about things you've seen, be a little bit more of an I. We're so narcissistic in our culture that it's like, how does it affect me? Does it inconvenience me? Did I not like it when somebody shoved me? Blah, 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 blah. Can you take that out and really be more of an observer and really try to take things in, try to notice what you're seeing, notice the things that are different, notice very small things as well as very big things. Like traveling, you do notice texture and smaller things. Like I remember being in Bali and noticing, I was at a shop, and they had the most incredible little tiny offerings that they would offer every morning on a banana leaf, folded in an interesting way. They'd make an offering to the three major gods. It's a Hindu country. Three major gods, and you'd see them on the dashboard of the taxi. You'd see them on this pavement with a little bit of incense burning. Nobody kicks it. They walk around it. It's a crowded country too, but they don't, they know what that is. You go into a shop and you'll see a little offering put in the racks with the clothes. The details of that country were incredible, but the details that you notice in, say, that trip to Paris, that was a fabulous one. That was a big one for me in many ways. And I noticed I ordered a dessert on a plate. I ordered dessert at one of these very fancy tea houses, tea shops. And it came, it was a splendid thing with, 40 ingredients. There was a sponge cake, and it had some kind of sauce, and then it had a candied this, and it was just the flavors and the combinations were extraordinary. And I suddenly realized, I'm looking at 400 years of culture on the plate here. Where the ingredients came from spoke to the history of France um, in the world and trade routes. The knowledge of how to make these ingredients, where that came from, how that evolved, it made me fully aware of what I was encountering there, the aesthetic and the economics. It takes time to do this. You can't rush through and be taking pictures and then on to figure out, oh, I'll look at the pictures later. It's learning how to be present in a deep way. I mean, we're all kind of meditating and trying to, chant or whatever the hell you do to try to be present. But this is being present. To sit and look again and look again and look deeper and think more and see more and not judge so much as notice. And for a long time, that was kind of a questionable thing. Could I notice or was I always going to be judgmental? You know, oh, I wouldn't wear that, or. If you get rid of the judgment and you just think of what I'm seeing, what I'm seeing, what I'm seeing, what I'm seeing, because often when you judge, you stop looking. You just categorize. Okay, that's this, that's no good, that's good. But if you suspend that a little bit and you just sit and think, what is it? What is it? And what's that? And what's that? And what's that? Oh, look at that. Notice how that pigeon has a broken leg. How are they interacting? And why is a fountain so delightful? What is it about water that erases some of the sadness we have in our lives? I'm finding that's the kind of stuff that works its way into you and is indelible when you leave. A little sketch can sometimes recall things that, if you absolutely need something visual. But to get in the habit of describing what you're seeing is such a challenge. See, this is a nice one. I just love these notebooks, so I just go to town on them when I get home from a trip. But it doesn't have to. Your travel notebooks, the more you can describe what you're seeing, the more it's going to feed you as a writer. What is you're in Amsterdam, say, and you're in a pancake house having your pancakes. Well, certainly, try to describe a Dutch pancake. Try to describe that bridge that you came over. What shape is it? What do you notice most about it? What do you notice? How would you describe what all those bicycles look like or seem like to you? The the shape of an old Dutch building is a certain. I always think of it as the top of a violin. That scroll work. It has a musical feel. They seem like little pieces of music. Those narrow buildings. The way the scroll works at the top, and those tops. That's how they often have a bracket that they can hook a winch to and raise a piano through a window. Those buildings have to be really strong. And think about, I would think about the age of the buildings and what was happening in Holland at the time, but you don't have to. I'm one of those people who does research before I go, and it's very important to me to go see where people lived. I'm one of those people. And some cultures are more history oriented than others. But I remember going to St. Petersburg doing research for Marina M. And standing out on the street corner at Litieni and Pestel, looking at the building where Joseph Brodsky lived, his essay Room and a Half. Well, I knew which apartment the room and a half was because he had described it, what floor and stuff. And I was just standing on the street corner staring up at that building, the tears coming down my face because Brodsky had died, and he's a great favorite of mine. And I looked around, and I'd say there were 5 other people standing on that street corner, Russians, crying, doing exactly what I was doing. I think that Patti Smith does a lot of that. If you read M Train, that's all that she's doing. Is she's a pilgrim, and she goes places where, she went all the way to Devil's Island in French Guiana, following the steps of Genet, who always wanted to be imprisoned on Devil's Island, but only got as far as the one on the mainland. And she thought, she was in search of Genet. That's a wonderful way to travel. And if you're a writer, you're paying respects to your forebears and the people who've influenced you. If you have heroes, have you ever gone to their city and stood in front of their house and just taken that in? Being a pilgrim is a wonderful way to live in the world. And then traveling, I always go out in search of the miraculous, which I think I've talked about. It's a surrealist game where you just leave the door and go look for something miraculous. And boy, when you're doing that, when you're traveling, especially if you don't know what you should be doing, you don't want to go to another museum, but you don't know what you should be doing, just go out and wander. And I'm somebody who hates to get lost. Hates it. So I've got my maps and stuff. I don't completely get lost, but you see things. I remember feeling kind of melancholy traveling in Milan, and I did this. I went out in search of the miraculous, and it put me in a completely different head. And one of the things I saw was a man. Oh God, I saw a bunch of really interesting things. One of them was a man beautifully dressed, looking down. He was standing on the street corner. He was looking down on the street. And I looked down the street, and there was a newspaper in the street. And he was reading the newspaper, but he was so nicely dressed, he didn't want to pick it up. That's the if you're looking for the miraculous, it's everywhere. And that it gives me such a feeling of the place, because of the level of style that somebody wouldn't want to pick up the newspaper. And then I walked a little further, and there was a youngish man, very handsome, looking up. And so, of course, I look up. And there was a woman, beautiful woman, they were probably both in their 30s. Beautiful woman with dark hair, kind of in a wavy bob, in her white slip, on the 3rd floor balcony, looking down at him. And then she drops something. And I saw him pick it up and then go inside and unlock the door and go inside. So she dropped the key. And I imagine she had made some kind of a dinner for them. It was very hot, so maybe a light salad, nice white, sparkling, crisp white wine. And I just got into a little story about those people, a real Italian movie. So you can also use these things as a trigger to your imagination and what is going on in this town and what is going on with these people. So I really suggest the Writer's Journal. I suggest working out your ability to describe and really try to stop taking pictures so much. I see people who are taking pictures instead of looking at things. I see people going to concerts and everybody's looking at it through their phone. It's like, what Why don't you just be there? Why don't you fully absorb the experience rather than trying to be the cameraman recording everything? Try to be in the experience and see what you can capture of the full experience and not just the visual flat experience in the phone. Try when you sit down to a cafe, not even when you're traveling, you practice at home. Go to a cafe, go to wherever, whatever you might have available for you in your town, and keep the phone off. Don't immediately go to the virtual world, because writing is all about the real world. So instead of hiding in the phone, take out your travel journal and just sit and looking around and say, how would I describe this place to somebody from Mozambique? How would I describe this for somebody living in another place physically? And then you might have ideas about your culture based on what you're seeing. It's always interesting to take the next step. That's what my wonderful teacher, Kate Braverman, would say, is take the next step. You don't have to just describe it either. You can make larger judgments and larger visions of the world, larger thoughts about the world based on what you're seeing. And that's why we read, is often for those larger insights, which is not the same as saying, oh, these people are talking too loud, and there's a real estate guy sitting there making a deal behind me. I want to knock his coffee over, all of that stuff, although you might want to mention that there is a real estate guy making a deal behind you. That's part of the culture, that's part of the landscape, is part of where you are, right? And I do like to do research and find out what happened before. So what kind of questions can I ask? Can I answer here about travel? Is anybody going anywhere and want to take in their journal? I like doing the journal without lines because here's one. What's the balance between gaining experiences through living and writing? I start to think I'm spending too much time writing or trying to write and not enough going out and gaining experiences. That is a very interesting question. I'd say that it's a dance, that there are times that you just have to finish the book. You have to write the book. You do have to write the book. But when you feel yourself getting dull, it hurts your book. It hurts you. It hurts your book. But going out and running around is not necessarily going to feed your writing. It's not necessarily living either. It's just running around. But if you can encounter the world with your sense of observation open, with your writer self open, and engage with the world that way, it feeds your writing. So to take some travel time. Young people who go straight from college to graduate school without taking any kind of a break or having what you would call life experiences, you always have to have something to write about. If you spend too much time perfecting the writing, but not getting experiences in the hopper, I think it gets very meta. It gets very self-referential. You start writing about the books you've read, or it tends to be a lot of. It gets thinner and thinner. It's like people who watch too much television, that all they can talk about is television. That direct encounter with reality. You don't really have to go anywhere. You just have to be more present when you are there, and notice more, and not be in such a hurry, and not checking yourself out when you are somewhere, not going right for your phone and try to relieve the experience of being alone. You know, embrace the being alone. There's a lot of observation, a lot of quiet presence that you can't do when you're with another person. You're paying attention to them. You're not paying attention to the surroundings. So, as somebody when I was younger didn't like to be alone for a second, that was not useful for me as a writer. I had to be willing to slow down and be by myself occasionally and just use that extra observational time to encounter reality. So this has been the travel section of Writing Wednesday. I'm going to be at the LitFest Pasadena on Saturday at 4:15 in conversation with Chris Daly about the revolution of Marina M and how that all came to be. And we'll be teaching with Pico Iyer, the travel journal, in July at Esalen. So I wish you good writing. It's a beautiful day. Go out and encounter the day. How would you describe that? Here's my view out my window. A lot of bamboo going on out there. A beautiful sunshiny day in LA. A little bit of smog and wish you good writing.